The Monty and the Pharaoh Show is brought to you by...
Because wine is your second favorite four-letter word. California wine, New York attitude. Good fucking wine.
Yeah.
That was definitely removed from WWE. I would put my feelings more in line, and this is going to make me sound even older than you're going back, to Bruno Sammartino's original reaction when when Vinny went before the legislature and said this is all a show. And yeah, I would, that was back then though. I don't feel the same way now, but that was my initial reaction. If you look at any of the interviews that Bruno Sammartino did from back during that time when he was on the outs with Vinny, that would pretty much be how I felt.
Speaking on his problems with Vince, do you think that was partially Bruno's own problem because he was jealous how wrestling was advancing, or do you think he really had those feelings, or he just had a plain dislike for Vince McMahon? What are your thoughts?
The second two, he was genuine, and he genuinely disliked McMahon. He was genuine. He was genuine in how he saw things and expressed his. You can disagree. I'm not saying he was right about everything, but he spoke from his heart. You have to remember that before Bruno Sammartino became champion, that Vince McMahon Sr. tried to drive him out of wrestling. He tried to blackball him so that he would never wrestle again. And Bruno had to leave the country because he couldn't get a booking in the United States because Vince McMahon Sr. called all of the major promoters to be sure that Bruno wouldn't get a booking. So Bruno went to Canada and he wrestled in Canada and amassed such a following in Canada that it pretty much forced McMahon Sr. to bring him back. So those are real deep cuts.
So forgive me for this, Gary, because I had never heard that story. I knew he was in Canada, and Vince brought him in because he's big. What was Vince's senior problem with Bruno? And then my second question would be, when Bruno did come back, did he still dislike Senior that whole time he was his champion?
Please clarify too. Is this his first run you're talking about? Before?
No, before his first run, before 63.
This is before his first run, Mike. Go on, Mr. Cappetta.
Yeah, I think it's just that Bruno had a head on his shoulders and was a little independent, and McMahon Sr. He didn't want anyone that was independent. He wanted to be able to control everyone totally. And Bruno would just like speak his mind. This was before he was a headliner. He was like a mid-carder or a supporting player on his way up. So McMahon Sr. just wanted to get I'll show you who has the power, who has the strength. And then he blackballed him.
So to drive it home, he basically cornered the market and forced Bruno back one way or the other. Fair enough?
I'm not sure that I understand what that means. What do you mean corner the market?
Well, by shutting off every other promotion, what are you doing? You're closing the market. You're cornering the market. So basically, he sealed off any other entrance point and said the only entrance back is me. Just hammering it home.
Yeah, he blackballed him. That's the easiest way to put it. Bruno talks about it I think he may have had more than one book, but in his first book, he talks about the whole situation and how he had to go to Canada to to develop a following. There are a lot of Italians that lived in Toronto. I think it was in Toronto was where he went. Yeah, and he just became a sensation. Now McMahon Senior has a very ethnic fan base between New York and Philadelphia and Boston and Pittsburgh. So that kind of appeal, turned out to be huge for McMahon Senior.
Do you
Wow.
think that history has been soft to Vince McMahon Sr.? Because Mike and I have always heard great things about Vince McMahon Sr. from other wrestlers we've had on that worked with him, and what a gentleman he was. But what you're telling us tonight, this is something that Junior would be crucified for. Any thoughts on that? I mean, does history take a pass on Senior? Because it seems like in general, Senior is certainly not being hit with the bullets that Junior is. Because if Junior did something like this would be another crucifixion on the internet. I can tell you that much. Your thoughts?
Because Junior was in your face about it. Junior he was arrogant before he had any power. He was arrogant when I worked with him and he did the TV when he was, Daddy's announcer. So, but McMahon Senior was more genteel. He was more of a gentleman. He dressed a certain way. He spoke a certain way. He was very soft in his mannerisms. But that didn't mean that he couldn't be a harsh competitor. We'll put it that way. I'll give you another story. I'll give you McMahon Senior's story. You ready?
Let's hear it. Yep.
I was announcing their TV out of the Philadelphia arena. It was Championship Wrestling. It was the one that was on WOR Channel 9 in New York and syndicated throughout the region. And I thought that I should have been making more money. So I decided that I was going to ask for a raise. And the only time that I ever got to see the McMahons was at the TVs. So I found out that the person I should speak to was McMahon Senior, and they had this little office. You know what? It wasn't at the arena. It was at the Philly. It was at the Philadelphia. No, it was at the Hamburg Fieldhouse. They had this little office between the two dressing rooms, and that's where McMahon Senior would hang out with Arnold Skolin and Gorilla Monsoon and Phil Zacco and sometimes Angelo Savoldi. So here I am, a 27-year-old kid, and I didn't know that you weren't supposed to ask for a raise. I didn't know that the 270-pound headliners would be afraid to ask for a raise. What did I know? I just thought that I should have made more money. And I was probably getting like $60 for the night, which was 3 hours of television. And in my mind, I had an answer for a comeback for whatever he was going to tell me. For whatever he was going to say to me, I had a comeback. So I go, knock on the door. Yeah. I open the door, and he looks at me. They look at me like, what are you doing here? Like, you don't belong here. Can I speak to you for a second? And I told him that I thought I should be making more money. And he said, well, how much money do you think you should be making? I said, oh, probably $100, like a night. And he said to me the one thing that I actually could never anticipate, so I had no comeback for. He looked at me and he said, I can't do that. I can't afford it.
Wow. And you're like, oops.
This is the guy that controls Boston wrestling, New York wrestling, Pittsburgh wrestling, Baltimore wrestling, Philadelphia wrestling, Washington, D.C. wrestling, and everything in between. He's a gazillionaire. Sorry, I can't afford it. I was speechless. So I left. I turned around, I walked out. But that's not the end of the story. We got paid in cash at the end of the night. And at the end of the night, when I got my envelope, There wasn't $60 in the envelope. He gave me the raise. The $100 was there. It's just that, and this is a McMahon thing, his son was the same way. They could never tell you that you do a good job or show anything, you know, that you're a valued employee. But he told Phil Zacco, give him the raise, and every 3 weeks after that, I got the higher amount of money.
Wow.
He just couldn't tell me. He wouldn't tell me because he didn't want me to think that I was, you know, a bigger guy, or he wanted everyone to be insecure is what it came down to.
It's